by way of introduction, as I said, we're all the members of the board of the Friends of Whitewater. So we meet every 2 months, and we thought this would be a good opportunity for Kendra to describe the project that she's been working on. And if all of you recall, back in, I think it was January, we came up with some plans for putting in the nature play area to replace the Gooseberry Glen campsite at Whitewater Park. And Kendra took this on as a project to design it. Kendra is a landscape architect, graduate student at the University of Minnesota. And so she took on this project, and we've been meeting with her every couple of weeks to look at the designs as they've progressed. And I think you're pretty much finished with the design now, aren't you, Kendra? And so today she's going to present the plan to us, and we can ask her questions when she's finished, and just see where we go from there. So Kendra, why don't you take it away?
Yeah, that sounds good. Thanks, Jay. So as Jay said, my name is Kendra Clenz, and I just finished the Master of Landscape Architecture program at the university. And I have also worked on nature play projects in the past through my schoolwork. And actually, I have a good friend, Allison Bender, who was an AmeriCorps member with Whitewater State Park a few years ago and made that big Lego model.
Oh.
She's my good friend from college. So that was one of the reasons I really wanted to do this project too, is I'd heard so much about Whitewater State Park leading up into this. So just to remind you, I was a graduate research assistant for the Nature Play Area Design and Research for the Gooseberry Glen Day Use Play Area Project. And that was a collaboration between the University of Minnesota and the Center for Urban and Regional Affairs at the University of Minnesota. And Joe Faber, who's the head of the Landscape Architecture Department, was my supervisor and also worked on the design for the project with me. And he's not here today. And then Sarah and Jeremy, the naturalists at the park, and Jay met with me and Joe bi-weekly to go through this project process. So I'm going to share my screen with you. I have a few slides to share. Let's see. Okay. So this project included a few different components, but the ultimate goal was to design a nature play area for Gooseberry Glen. And the other two components of this project were to survey existing nature play areas to find out about them, what worked well, what has not. And then we also developed a survey for potential users of the play area, specifically teachers or leaders of local groups that would potentially bring groups of children here. And then finally, hopefully in the next month or so, we will come out with a final report that not only shares the design that I'm going to share with you today, but also some of those survey results as well. So just really quickly this afternoon, I am going to talk a little bit about nature play, just so you understand where we're coming from with the design decisions that we made. I'm going to just give you a couple updates on the survey of existing nature play areas, because I think they're really informative for some of the decisions we made later. And then I will show you the design process that we went through with Jay. So a lot of this will be familiar to him. And then I'll share the final design and show you some of the pieces of that. So really quickly, this project was initiated by Whitewater State Park to bring a nature play area to Gooseberry Glen, which, as you know, was originally a campground before it closed in 2007 after severe flooding. And so the intent is to create a new space for children and families at the day use area, which is across the footpath from the footbridge from the Lower Cedar Hill campground. And then on the other side is across the highway, across Highway 74 from the North Picnic area, which is much more popular. And in addition, this play area can be a place for school groups and other large groups of children to spend time at Whitewater, and also be a place for interpretive events. Sarah and Jeremy came to the project with a lot of ideas of what could be included in this nature play area, and Joe and I's role was to figure out what play elements and configurations work best. Based on these goals, the site's conditions and constraints, and the survey results about what has worked well. So really quickly, I'm not sure how much convincing you need, but I will quickly explain what nature play is and the importance of nature play to put you into the mindset of our decision making. So nature play is free play. It is unstructured time spent in nature, and it's not new. It's something that humans have always been doing. A nature play area is a designated and designed space that provides a loosely structured, condensed collection of opportunities, experiences, and materials found in nature. These experiences found in nature that are designed for a nature play area may include playing in forests or meadows or near water, scrambling across rocks, balancing on fallen tree trunks, creating imagined worlds with your friends, or even observing insects. In addition to being a condensed version of many different experiences found in nature, a nature play area is also a designated play space that uses primarily natural materials and forms rather than a standard playground, which can often be completely artificial and use manufactured materials. And in recent years, nature play areas have become much more popular. And about 23 out of the 28 nature play areas that already exist that we surveyed had only installed their nature play area within the last 10 years. So these were just, I won't read them off to you, but these were some of the things that we were considering when looking at the different elements to put in a nature play area. A lot of times there are developmental goals, and then other goals like social development, reduce stress and anxiety, and even environmental care later in life that come from nature play. But I'm sure you all understand that quite well. And then some of the possible play features and supporting amenities are listed here. And all of these were used in our survey and are listed quite discreetly. But of course, these are often found in combination with one another, and you'll see that in the final design. So for the survey, to inform possibilities and goals and to use for future reference for other state parks wanting to design a nature play area, we conducted a survey of existing play areas to see how they have performed and gather takeaways. And we surveyed 28 different play areas around Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Iowa, and asked them the following questions about what was successful, what was less successful, maintenance, and then things we would do differently. And so just really quick, some of these takeaways were most successful things tended to be like sand, mud, and water play. Children really enjoyed the climbing structures that were provided, which is a little more difficult in terms of like regulations and stuff too when installing a nature play area. So that's something we can talk about later. Loose parts and logs for kids to move around themselves is also quite popular. And then planning in advance, like we're doing right now, is something that a few different projects noted as being part of their success. And then I think something that's really important for the Friends group is what made this not successful was maintenance, funding, and replacement of natural materials, and then communication about the play area's existence and letting people know who it's for everyone, and how it can be used. And so there's some other takeaways on the right-hand side, and I think I won't read through them all, but just having a plan and creating spaces for everyone and access to amenities like bathrooms and accessible pathways was something I think every nature play area manager noted, just making it comfortable for everyone more generally rather than a play element itself. So the design process began with an initial site visit to Whitewater State Park in January. And though it was difficult to see the site because it was covered in snow, it is important to see a place in person early when possible before we start making decisions. So then, using some of the suggested activities and programs from the naturalists, we developed a concept drawing of where the nature play area could be within Gooseberry Glen and what might take place in it. This sketch was for the DNR archaeologist, but it also drove following conversations with others. Then in March, we had an on-site meeting with Stacy Smith and other members of the DNR, including Whitewater staff and people from the state outside of Whitewater. And at this meeting, we learned a lot more about possibilities and limitations for the design. And then in March to May to June, we did some concept drawings. We iterated on them and got feedback from Jay and Sarah and Jeremy. And then in June, we refined that drawing and came up with a final site plan that can be used for door reference and for funding opportunities. And also, I'll say this again, but we have a graduate student right now who's continuing this project, and they're going to make like Photoshop renderings of what this could look like and make it easier for you to envision. So I'm just going to quickly take you over some major considerations and limitations. Sorry, one second. So some goals for the nature play area included showcasing recent history, preserving the spurs at the campground and picnic tables if it works. But we were told that it's not necessary by the state that's not a part of any necessary cultural heritage to preserve. It would be good to highlight and preserve the CCC and WPA era history when necessary and possible. And then there was also a need to consider other auxiliary features, such as a wellness trail, which is a project that Sarah has taken on with David Motzenbecker, who's a landscape architect. And so that project is within the same space as this project, but the work that Sarah and David are doing is happening with a different funding and on a different timeline. Another auxiliary feature that we were thinking about including, or Jeremy and Sarah wanted to include, were a picnic shelter and also a river overlook near the site. And sketches of these are included in the final design proposal that we'll look at. And then I think the last big consideration is to draw on the surrounding ecology, geology, and history of the site. I think that's what makes any landscape design, especially a play area, really unique, is to make it site specific. Some other constraints include need for accessibility. There are sanitary constraints. So even though I said that water play was really popular in the survey that we conducted, the septic system and the contact that people have with water and the way that water would need to flow through a water play area doesn't allow, it won't allow, it won't be possible. And so we can't do water play, even though that's really popular, and it would be really awesome to have that right next to the river. And then incorporating natural plantings is also possible. As you know, it's a former campground, so it's mostly turf and then shrubs and trees. But doing native plantings won't like breach the cultural heritage of the site either. There are also 2 ash trees that will be dead in the future, and so we assumed that they will be removed because of the presence of emerald ash borer. And then we also needed to accommodate existing uses because this day use area is really underused, but it is still in use by some groups. And so we considered those in the design as well, which I'll show you in a map really quick. So this was the first initial sketch. So after we learned about these initial possibilities and constraints, we created 3 sketches of ideas for the nature play area. And these guided our conversations and ideas into the final design. So this is the original sketch for the archaeologist. And so it's quite basic. It shows some picnic areas in the perimeter, a general play area in the center. There's a quiet area over here by this existing building. And then this original camp drive loop has been connected here and blocked off here and here. And so that was a big move that Joe and I decided to introduce. early on was blocking off that drive road because it just would not be safe for children to be playing in a center right here with cars going around it. And if you will excuse me for one moment. And here we go. I think this will be a little more helpful. So the play area is on this former campground loop. And this area was chosen because it is close and accessible for people arriving from the campground via the footbridge. It doesn't disturb the currently used east side of the site. And so this is a popular picnic spot right now for large groups. It is set back from the Whitewater River for safety. And then the loop itself creates a natural barrier, the drive from the Whitewater River and this creek and the play area as well. Also, there's a maple tapping area that we didn't want to disturb. I think the other important thing about this was that it was located near the bathrooms. And I think that was something that had been brought up times, was that bathrooms and being close to them is important. And in the survey itself, it said if there were bathrooms at our play area, kids would have stayed here for 3 more hours, you know? So I think that was really important to situate it here. So even though Gooseberry Glen is this whole entire area, I think there was a lot of agreement from the very beginning that this was the best spot for it. So that's something we can talk about, but that was our decision making around that. So I'm going to now take you through 3 different concept sketches that Joe Favor drew. And these really drove the rest of our design process and decision making. And Jay has provided feedback on these as well. And so I hope that I'll share these 3 with you, and then I'll show you the final design. So the first concept sketch that we looked at centered around developing a small dry stream bed lined with boulders as a way to focus the play space. And we organized the program elements and provided a microcosm of the environment that shaped Whitewater State Park. So there's the central river channel that would be lined with rock boulders and could be used for climbing, sitting, jumping, building, etc. There could also be varying depth to the channel, so it provides different physical challenges. And so there's also other additional features besides the river channel itself. And so from the very beginning, we started to incorporate a stage, which was something I think that Sarah Holger really wanted for naturalist programming at the site. And then maybe some quieter elements too, like a maze or a labyrinth or a quiet space. I think the other important element that's going to carry through all of the designs I show you as well is the inclusion of picnic tables, especially around the perimeter. And this was something that we got a lot of good feedback on as well, was keeping picnic tables and seating around for parents and guardians to watch. And that's something we also learned in the survey was there weren't enough places in a lot of the play areas that people had already put together that didn't, there's a lot of places that didn't have seating. And so there was nowhere for adults to watch their children. And so we thought it was really important to have a place for families to sit and to relax and enjoy themselves as well. So I think the feedback on this idea specifically was that it felt less practical and higher maintenance because leaves and debris might get easily trapped in that created river channel. And also this streamer river channel, I don't know if you can tell, but it looks really static and it doesn't really seem like a place for kids to be invited into it and manipulate the rocks and the sand and the water itself. It's very like highly designed, which brings us to a completely different idea, which is more about large boulders in a forest. And so this second concept still kind of builds on that idea of the river and the ecology of the area, but it really plays up the forest aspect. And so Joe really highlighted keeping every single tree. And that's something we also had made a decision to do, was to try to preserve every tree possible except the 2 ash trees that we that are existing, but we can maybe assume will be gone in the near future. So I think the other important part about this was that we started to introduce a sand play area, which is over here by the building. And I think this ended up moving around a few times, but we will ultimately see a sand area in the final design. However, this was also a really popular element in other people's play areas. And so we felt like this placement seemed a little off, considering that it should be maybe more central. And so I think the main feedback on this sketch included people liked the idea of having boulders to climb on, but were concerned about the height of the boulders. People really liked this log circle that was next to the building and having a gathering space right there. And then the third thing was there was concerns about accessibility of some of these play elements compared to some of the other drawings that wasn't really incorporated into this sketch. So quickly, the last sketch was the most popular sketch, and this centered on a large hill and tunnel. And so you can see there's a big hill here that's probably about 7 feet. And this explores how to get a larger hill on site and really get that feeling of being like on a bluff or having those experiences that you might have somewhere else in Whitewater State Park. So how can you feel like you're in a stream and also on a bluff in this tiny little space? And so this, it's not that tiny, but the height allows for a tunnel to be placed under the hill as well. And so then the remainder of the play space would just be more meandering, and this would be more central. Sorry, that didn't make sense. So this was the favorite concept, and there was a lot of fun ideas about how the hill could be used other times of year, whether that was for sledding. And I think Jay and Sarah and Jeremy really liked the idea of putting a tunnel in with a box culvert or something else that kind of tells that story of water and how water moves through this area in a lot of places, and has been manipulated to move through this area. So we drew a few more sketches because you can't just draw 3 before we ended on our final design. And so this, I will zoom in and show you some of the details. So many of the elements included in the concept sketches are found in this final design, which is why I tried to pass over the concepts pretty quickly. And in the final design, the nature play area at Gooseberry Glen echoes existing park features. It creates a play space that invites children to experience features in Whitewater State Park at a much smaller scale. And here, like the rest of Whitewater State Park, topography and flow are key themes. The Gooseberry Glen play area invites those who use it to move through the space linearly from one end of an accessible primary path near the building to the other end, which lines up with the footbridge to the campground. Along this path, children can dig their hands into the sand, climb a rock face, or crawl through a tunnel. They can build, balance, run, and rest. And throughout the play area, picnic tables and spurs from the former campground are preserved for parents and guardians to rest and keep watch. Spread throughout the designated play area are small hills and large stones that mirror the surrounding bluffs and can be used for both active play and seating. These same stones are incorporated into the seating for a small amphitheater located near the existing building with the bathrooms to be used for gathering and naturalist programs. Alongside the amphitheater, other supporting features include the wellness trail, which is outlined here. This is a sketch from David Motzenbecker. A river overlook, which was where Jeremy had situated it, and then a picnic shelter, which was also not a location of our choosing, but I think where Sarah and Jeremy were thinking that it would fit best. So that's something you can also speak about with me or with them. And each element within the nature play area is informed by the concept of emulating the surroundings of the site, bluffs to river channel. The features are informed by the state park's desired activities for children and survey results, which are primarily informed the design through questions about popularity of particular elements and maintenance. This design aims to introduce and balance different possible experiences from loud and active to quiet. The features within the play area are also spatially distributed to create that sense of movement or progression. I think something that we learned through the survey too was that when a lot of really popular things are squished together, they can get really clogged up or busy. And so the sand area, which is right here, is quite separate from, this is the cave or tunnel and climbing structure. And then over here are the logs and loose parts for building. And I think those will be the three most popular things within the play area. So those are spread out along this main path. And then down here, there's a secondary path that has some of the more quiet or structured activities, including this quiet area or a maze, and then next to the building, that amphitheater. It's quickly, locations of play elements were also determined by trees, like I mentioned, because overuse of the areas right around trees or change in topography under a tree canopy can compact the earth and disturb the tree. And we don't want to create extra disturbance, especially here at the state park. So we want to keep all of those trees healthy. So I'm going to just take you through a few of these different elements so you can see where they are and see the labels maybe a little bit more clearly. So the bus and drop-off gathering area is a place for groups of children to collect and gather before and after spending time at the nature at play area. It consists of a series of log cuts arranged for both playing and sitting. And the bus drop-off will be that part of that new road addition that connects the cut-off parts of the existing campground loop drive. This is also a place where welcoming and interpretive signs could potentially be placed. And it's also near that existing building and bathrooms. The second feature is spread out throughout the site, and these are a series of small hills. So this is an image from the Chicago Botanic Gardens, and so their hills are really large, so I wouldn't envision them being this big, but this is just an example of what it could feel like. But these could serve as a place to jump, to roll, to climb, and they are placed so that they can simultaneously act as an edge or a psychological barrier between the play area and the river. As in a lot of our conversations, we learned that kids are naturally drawn to the river. And even if there's a play area there, they're gonna wanna run down to the river and be by it. And so if there are ways to kind of not even hurt them physically, just make them feel like the space is moving to the other direction, then that can really help with the flow and also protect them. The small hills can also contribute to gross motor skill development, healthy risk taking, and the confidence that accompanies activities such as climbing. And like I mentioned before, climbing is one of the most popular activities in the survey that we did. Sand play is also likely to be a very popular attraction, and water play or water and sand play were considered as options, but as I said, the sanitary requirements constrain us to sand only. And that said, there's an opportunity to provide items such as buckets to transport water from a spigot or the CCC fountain that was in a previous slide to the play area so that we can use water to manipulate the sand as well. I think it's important to mention that in the survey, one respondent said they wished they had incorporated a sand area or mud kitchen into the play area right away, because even though they decided not to add that feature in, children went ahead and made a mud pit of their own, and it's like still a really popular feature. And so I think it's important. I know sand can seem a little bit scary and it's a lot more maintenance, but it's something that children tend to really enjoy and I think could be a really great addition to this play area. And then a couple detailed notes to note about the sand play is that there's space here for a sand table for those who stand or are in a wheelchair. And then there are also limestone blocks placed throughout just to make little separate spaces for children and places for adults to sit with their children close by as well. Sort of like in this top left photo. So as I mentioned in initial conversations, the idea of a large central hill with a tunnel was really popular. And because of the large amount of earth moving and the required length of the tunnel under such a large hill, which would be potentially kind of almost scary or dangerous. And also we were seeing difficulties with placing the hill without disturbing any trees. Joe and I suggested doing a box culvert tunnel that is covered by limestone blocks, like some of these images on the left. And this provides a cave-like feature that mirrors the local geology. It kind of provides another climbing opportunity, and about 1 in 5 of the nature play areas surveyed had a cave or tunnel feature, and one respondent noted that it was really well liked. So now I'm going to talk about some more common features in nature play areas that you see around the Twin Cities, or see in ones that are just designed in-house by the naturalists. And so these tend to be made out of more natural materials, or just like logs and different ways of arranging and cutting logs. So this first one is balance logs into log forest. And so balancing logs can be integrated into almost any part of the site. And they also provide that opportunity to develop gross motor skills and, take part in imaginative play. And in parts of the site, they can be integrated into an upright log forest. And both of these features are super simple. They can be placed in the ground without too much modification, or they could be debarked and sealed, as you see in the top photos with the debarking, and they're a little more anchored in place, whereas on the bottom, they're a little looser. So loose materials are also super popular, and all the play areas surveyed had one. That was the #1 thing that everybody had. And they contribute to creative play, social interaction, imagination, and here the loose parts and logs are expected to be popular. And like I said, are spread out from the other potentially popular play features. And in a couple of slides, I'm going to talk about the potential to incorporate a storage area onto the site. And this would be a great place to keep extra logs and loose parts, because in the survey we learned that these tend to degrade quickly because they're natural. And so like a lot of these little like log section cuts that the kids are playing with will probably need to be replaced every couple of years from like rotting or splintering. And I think that's just the nature of nature play. So the last few, open space, we did leave some. I think that running and free play and being able to see across an expanse will be really helpful to create a natural break between some of those quieter areas and the busier parts of the site. Also, the maze or quieter area that I mentioned can function as a reflective space. It can be a space to get away. It could be paired with sensory or pollinator plantings, and it can be just a place of rest for all ages. And it doesn't even need to be a maze, but I think it might be important to incorporate just a quieter space within the play area. Something I think that Sarah really wanted was another place to do interpretive programming, and a little more formally. And so a small amphitheater with a combined storage space can support those naturalist events and also just independent gatherings. And so this amphitheater is situated right near the existing building, so that there are bathrooms and an accessible path nearby. And the storage can also hold items for sand play as well. So it can serve quite a few functions. And I think something that I'm not going to talk about too much more is that Sarah and Jeremy really wanted a lot of extra items, like an art area and a puppet show. And I think we started to move away from those really highly programmed things that really tell kids exactly what they should be seeing or doing, and moved more toward something that's more open and to the children's interpretation. So I think that's something you can talk about with us or with Sarah too, but I think that's what she moved toward as well. And then last, the existing picnic tables are placed on the perimeter of the site, like I mentioned, And the survey, like I said, included a lot of responses that talked about the desire to have more of this. And so supplementing the picnic tables are limestone seating and climbing blocks placed throughout the site near the sand area, set into the hill. I think they can serve a lot of different functions and just be another thing to jump up, move around, rest on. Okay, so looking forward, I'm excited to hear what else you want to see and what your suggestions are. And of course, I'll send this to you so that you can look at it a little more closely and in detail. I'm also interested in how you see yourselves involved in the maintenance and stuff. And then I mentioned the graduate research assistant who's continuing work on this project, so it's not over and you have someone that you can call upon to make changes if necessary. And then I just want to add too that some of these ideas may seem less feasible at face value, but this is the beginning of the project. And the more that you edit yourself down or hold yourself back here, it's just going to be less than what you want it to be. So really go big with your ideas and what you support or don't support in this project. And then I hope that you liked it, and I hope that you have questions for me as well.
Okay, great. Well, Kendra, thank you very much for that presentation. This is a exciting plan. You put a lot of thought into this, and this is laid out, from my perspective, this is laid out very well, very nicely. One question that I have, just kind of not specifically about the play area, but what about that road? Is that road still active? And it looks like you have the road going through the play area still with a dashed line. Is that going to be available for maintenance vehicles?
Yeah, so I think the proposal doesn't change anything about the road. It exists as a path.
Okay.
There's just gates on it so that maintenance vehicles can get through, because I think that will be necessary. And then it can be a walking path as well.
Okay. And then the initial loop that goes by the existing building and turns to the right and comes back where the campground used to be, is that still going to be maintained for bus drop off and things like that?
Mm-hmm. Sorry, Jay, can you say that one more time?
The existing road that
Yep.
comes in from below and goes past the existing
Oh,
building and then turns right, loops back, and you see all the, on the lower right, you have all the previous campsites that are forking out from. What will become of that road?
I think that Joe and I put that out of our scope of work. So as far as I know, it would be an existing road. I think something we talked about was parking, and Sarah and Jeremy were concerned about parking. And we just did not address it. But I think it's also hard because you don't want to create a project that's just full of parking spaces. You want.
Yeah, that's kind of a separate issue, I guess, but yeah. Okay, good.
Yeah, but that's a really good question, Jay.
And I think that's something we'll have to address in the future, but the main focus right now is on the play area up in the center there.
Sure.
Do you have other questions from our group or comments?
I'm quite impressed with it, really. I think it looks really exciting.
Excellent. It looks very, very doable too.
Yeah.
It does.
The
I like the limestone rocks and the logs, you know, for the climbing things. And I think that tunnel is a really great idea.
Mm-hmm. One of the comments we had earlier on the tunnel was try to make it emulate a cave, as we find in the driftless area. So one of the characteristics of the park is that there are caves up in the rock. And if there's a way you can use native materials to kind of put a facade on it that makes it look like a cave, that would be a good teaching opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you have that in the design, don't you? Or something similar to that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Kendra, as you drew this up, did you think about it as did you think about the increment, how incremental this would be? In other words, what you would start with, what would be next, second, third, fourth, fifth? Is that thought about at all?
Mhm. I don't think we thought about it too much, but to answer your question and also not answer your question, in the survey, a couple people said we really wished we had had this like really well planned out before we even started. So some of those like bigger changes that you're going to make find themselves in the play area. So you don't end up putting some loose logs around and never coming back to it. And so I think if you want to do things like the tunnel or the cave with the rocks or some of those smaller hills and the big changes, personal opinion, but I think you should do those first.
Yeah.
Sort of the major things, the things that are going to define the landscape.
It changes the ground itself. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that makes sense. And you mentioned the hills forming somewhat of a natural barrier from the river. I assume these are the hills that are kind of across the center that are shown in darker green.
Yes.
What's on the river side of those? Is there anything there that would attract kids? I guess the natural thing is that most of the play stuff is below that, so they're going to be attracted to that rather than going to the other side. But what is there on top of that between there and the river?
Mm-hmm. I think, well, you can see that there are the picnic tables. And so I think the hope was that if there are groups going or if people are there with their children are there with their families, that those families would also be at the picnic tables and create that barrier of guardianship. I think something that we talked about with, I think Jeremy was really pushing the river overlook. And so where it is a little bit further away from the play area, so it might not be a problem, but there is this need to provide opportunities to be somewhat by the river and to have that experience, because when we went on our site visit back in March, and I'm sure you've spent time there too, people are pulling the picnic tables right down by the river.
Yeah.
Especially if you can see my mouse, I think like right here by that footbridge, it gets a little bit lower, and there was some picnic tables down here that people had pulled down to spend time at. And so I don't have a good answer, but
This is Joel, as a child who spent many happy hours messing around in the edge of the Whitewater River, boy, that would be fun to include. I don't know how to do it safely and everything, but it was great for me growing up.
mm-hmm.
You do have the river, however, in the swim area.
Yeah, but that's different. There's two different kinds, and we used both of them. But the one with the rocks and the river and the flowing water, boy, that's such a great experience.
Mm-hmm. I think
No, I can vouch for that. I can vouch for that. When I was a kid, our favorite thing was to go down by the river and either catch crabs or throw rocks or do something in the water. And it's a little different from being in a pond where you have sand. I mean, you have rocks and things like that, which is it's great to be able to look at that.
mm-hmm.
Could you channel part of the river into a smaller area?
I suspect you could, but the river is going to reorient, and rework itself. So it would have to be something you kind of do and then redo at times. I don't know what the risk of it is, but as a kid, the river was shallow. It wasn't too fast. It was almost ideal for a young boy.
Yeah.
And a young girl. I think that the river is going to be there, so I think that there's plenty of opportunities for kids and their families to play along the river and that. But I think one of the things with the playscape is that when we're building that, and I think that you mentioned this, Kendra, that they really wanted a water feature, and I know they're hugely popular, but I'm also involved in Olmsted County Park Commission. And we actually just had a review of our playscape at Oxbow Park last night. And one of the issues with the water has to do with water being used in a playscape, has to do with the health department. Yeah. And the idea that it's not potable water, but that doesn't mean kids aren't going to drink it. So, but the river is there, and if people, and for safety reasons and that, you can't just have all features in one playscape, but they can still access the river with their parents. If their parents want to take them down to the river and sit and watch them, they can. That's doable. So I think just being able to haul water over there, I mean, they're going to do it, whether you make it available or not. I did want to say though that one of the when we were reviewing the playscape at Oxbow last night, our superintendent did mention the idea of flexibility, things that maybe don't work so well, that they change. One of them is I see that you have the maze on there, and different things work in different places. So, but they built a maze, and it just didn't get used. They just were not interested in it, so they turned it into something else. And I'm not saying not have a maze or have a maze. I'm just saying that, some of these features should have some flexibility in it. Say, oh, this didn't work, or if only we had this instead of this, that we maybe can build a little bit of flexibility in some of the features when we get started, knowing that maybe we'll have to change it somewhere along the line. That's all.
But I think the big thing back to the river is it's gonna be there, and it's gonna ebb and flow. It's gonna get wide and get narrow and all those things. And I think the thing with the river is just so you don't fence it off, just so it's completely available and people can go there. And it's a state park and it's a natural area. You're not gonna keep kids from the river completely. That's just not going to happen. And put fencing up or to do something that really keeps them away from the river is not a good idea either, I don't think. But the hills and stuff, keeping them kind of into the area is good. I think it'll do its function, and still the river will be accessible.
So what happens if the kids go over the other side of the hill and you don't see them?
Well, that's a parent problem, isn't it?
I was just going to say that. Well, I'm assuming that they're being supervised to some extent.
Right.
There's not going to be lifeguards here.
Yeah. No, it's more or less of a suggestion, or a kind of a subtle way of keeping them focused on the area that's of interest on the bottom of that. So.
Yeah, I think the hills too are low enough that they'll stay within sight.
Yeah. Kendra, we're talking about the river. Has anybody considered what happens when this river floods? Because the reason this is no longer a campsite is because they get flooded out repeatedly. How high does the water come during a flood?
Jay, that's a really good question. And that's what I put in the report, saying when this gets engineered, you need to think about how to remove different materials and their structural stability. But that I did not end up including in this really conceptual design.
Okay.
But it has not been forgotten for sure.
Okay.
I think I just wanted to say one quick thing too about children accessing the river and playing by it versus having an experience in the play area itself. And something that we've been talking about with the naturalists is that a lot of people, from what Sarah has told me, go to Whitewater State Park just to use the picnic grounds
Yeah.
and the beach, and they don't go into the rest of the park. And so I think some of the hope for this play area, maybe not for you, maybe for you after I say this, is that children who haven't ever really gotten out into the park before can have these like mini experiences of what else is out there, and introduce their families and bring them closer to some of those experiences that you find beyond the picnic area. I think that was one of the goals that we had in mind as well.
That's a good point, and people may see this as an extended picnic area as well, with the side benefit of having a place for the kids to play. And I think that serves a good purpose too. So like you say, it's to introduce kids and families to what the park can be, other than just an open area with picnic tables.
Mhm.
One other question, as you look, suppose we build this according to this design, what do you see as the maintenance schedule? What has to be maintained regularly? What kind of intervals, and how do we go about keeping this thing up so it doesn't deteriorate?
Yeah, I have a few things to say about that quickly. I think, like I mentioned before, anything that's like completely natural, especially things that aren't sealed, like the logs and the wood pieces, that probably is like a yearly to every 2 yearly thing. I don't know if Sharon, you know more about this, learning from Oxbow Park, but that's what I would anticipate for that. And then I think the big concern is the sand maintenance, and there's going to be a lot of leaves and debris falling into that. And so for that to be a pleasant place to be, I think will require some pretty frequent maintenance. And then I'll just say quickly too, we didn't in this design include any like natural plantings. It's all the grass lawn that it was as a picnic area or as a campground, and then the trees that are existing. But I made suggestions in the final report that it would be nice to use natural plantings as a way for kids to be near it. It can also create barriers between spaces if it's a little bit taller, you know. But because that takes a lot more maintenance than mowing a lawn, I think the amount of natural plantings will be up to the discretion of the maintenance team at Whitewater, and also the friends, depending on how involved you are in the maintenance of the play area as well.
Okay, good.
So I do have one question about the little hills. Now these don't currently exist, correct? And we'll be building the hills. Okay. Because those might need more maintenance than one would think, with shifting earth and water, right? Just erosion and that kind of thing. I mean, just because you put a pile of dirt, there, doesn't mean it's be there next week.
The slopes can be an issue. You know, if you want it to maintain in grass, then you're going to have the ability to have a mower run over it. But if the kids use it a lot, it's going to be worn off. So, you know, that's going to be interesting to see what you do there. It almost, you know, my kids really love to climb on rocks, you know, so if you could get some piles of limestone rocks, that would kind of make your hills, but that's going to be hard, and it won't be, you know, where you want to run up and down, I don't think. So I don't know. It's worth thinking about.
Yeah, I think that's a question for you too, is how natural you want this play area to be, because I think Joe and I's assumption was to put something to stabilize the earth below the grass. And so it wouldn't necessarily just be a mound with grass growing on it, but a mound with some type of sheet keeping it in place. And that can be biodegradable, or is often sometimes plastic too. And so I know there's a lot of really innovative ways to do this work without using plastic now, but that's also something to think about.
Kendra, Mike Kennedy, I'm sorry I was late to the meeting. I think Joseph quit trying. There was a very difficult login process today. I'm not sure why, but it failed numerous times. Anyway, my question would be around maintenance, and a concern, having been in the park a lot as a kid, in an area like this with piles, not only dirt, but all the way down to wood piles. What about varmint control?
I did not think about that.
I would say it's going to be a factor.
Mhm. Is
Piled
that-
rocks are going to invite snakes.
Yeah.
And digging in mounds is going to be an issue.
Mhm.
It's not, I'm not saying it would change the design, but I think the maintenance people are going to be rather intrigued with what they're going to have to do. Like I think Jay said, mowing is going to be an issue.
Mhm.
Even though it's the natural growth that you're going to leave,
Mhm.
it's still gonna, with all those things around, changing how rain flows in the area and where the water is going to go, there's going to be weed growth that'll have to be weed whacked, not just mowed.
Mhm.
And another concern I have is liability on encouraging trips to the river to do things. I think you've built a mini park inside of a park. That was the concept. And I think that trying to keep them, especially the smaller kids, within that area via signage, and I think the mounds is a good idea. I think the river flow is on the photo left to right. Is that correct?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
the mound is a natural dike on that end, even though in high water, you're still going to get water in the campground. I think we should talk about when it's going to flood, not if it floods. And when it's going to flood, what's the issue going to be with
Mhm.
the loosely packed earth, if there is any, and can rocks be used in continuing water borders or erosion type borders? I think limestone for seating is great. Kids love to play on it. It's pretty, it's natural to the area. And I think more limestone blocks could be used to control erosion when water is higher. So those are my comments. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. That makes a lot of sense. I think that this is something that's not completely answered, but with the small hills or anything that's changing the flow of water, because it is in a flood zone and will be flooding probably numerous times in the near future. I'm not sure what we can and cannot do to make significant changes to the movement of water. So I think what's here would not significantly change how water is flowing, especially during a severe flood event. But like anything really big where we're purposefully trying to change how water moves might not be okay. I'm not sure.
So
You
I
sound like a
will,
DNR person.
I will say that we did have constructed some hills at the Oxbow Playscape,
Mhm.
and I have not heard of any issues with the problem with animals digging hole. I mean, I'm sure there might be, but it doesn't seem to have changed the structure of the hills at all, or children's abilities to play there. The idea of we have a little pond with the frogs and that in it, that is one of the most popular used features, kids gathering up tadpoles and that kind of thing. So I've not heard of any issues with what did you call them, Mike? Varmints? No. Anyways, with varmints being an issue, and certainly we have them out there. But that's part of the idea of being in nature. That's what you see. That's what's there. And those are things that the more kids are comfortable with seeing animals or animal habitat or evidence of an animal being there and that in nature, the more they might think about it as they grow up and to preserve that kind of life. I don't know, that's just my thought. It's just part of what nature is. I mean, we don't want a sterile.
I understand that. But my concern is loose soil beneath play areas or beneath a tunnel or loose soil. There's going to have to be some consideration in compaction, probably of gravel beneath placing some of these items. And like where there's going to be a wood pile, I can't believe we would put that just directly on the ground. Not necessarily a rack, but there should be something gravel or stone underneath it. And again, stones that are closely placed in areas where the kids are going to be crawling on the ground. Again, I try to prevent from the onset erosion around them or possible tunneling of natural varmints. Yes, but I don't want to build a house for them right on the path. I guess that's what I'm saying.
At this stage, we're looking at features and layout and what can be put there. I think the next stage, once we decide on a plan, we have to decide on just how that's going to be engineered and how that's put together.
Those are engineering
comments
issues.
on that, Kendra? Down the line, do you talk about that in your architecture program?
Yeah, I think really quick, in my landscape architecture program, we usually do a lot of technical stuff and then a lot of conceptual stuff. And then our assignments can either be both or one or the other. And so I think the way that Joe and I approached this was from a less technical perspective, a more experiential perspective. But we kept technical things in mind because it would be silly not to.
Yeah.
And so I don't think it's quite clear, but like under the tunnel right now would be part of that paved or gravel path that we have introduced. But I actually really appreciate, Mike, you bringing up the woods, like pieces and logs right on the ground, because a lot of the nature play areas you see have exactly that. And so I think that this project is taking it one more step above and able to, you and others are able to think about some of the things that can make them a better experience or safer or just more fun. So I appreciate you bringing that up. And I think I'll include a lot of the thoughts that you've all had in the final report.
Okay.
So what's next then?
Kendra, the next step then is to come up with a final report for us. Is that it?
Yeah, so that's almost complete and that has a lot more details. And then we'll probably still be in draft form so that the next student who's making some graphics that can kind of show you in 3D what this would look like can be that report as well. And she's working through the summer and then maybe into the fall as well, but I'm not sure.
Okay, good. Is Joe still her advisor on this then?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, Kendra, thank you very much for that presentation. This is exciting. This is a lot of work, and you've done a good job of putting these things together. So, again, thank you very much.
Yeah, I appreciate all of your time. It was fun to finally share it. I feel like we've been looking at it for 6 months, and it's good to say it out. So.
Thank you, Kendra. The diagrams were very helpful.
It's really exciting. Yeah, it's really good. It's really exciting.
Great.
Nicely done. Very good job.
Thanks. Okay.
Okay.